And this is one of the great things about growing up Indigenous. Our elders in our communities are really good at seeing the gifts and the talents of the young children who are growing up in their communities. And I was the oldest of a big group of cousins. There's probably 15 of us of cousins that I had, and I was the oldest. And so I was the bossiest and was really doing a lot of the commanding of my little cousins. And my elders were like, hey, this Len has a leadership style. And so my grandmother, who was the matriarch of our community, often did very numerous public speaking engagements and taught the masses as well in our sacred longhouses with like 600 people in front of our entire community. And so I think I remember being 7 years old and she was like, okay, come on, grandson. And I would stand beside her as she stood in front of 600 people talking for about an hour. And I would stood there. So I knew from a young age what it feels like to have, a lot of eyes and a lot of minds towards you.
Welcome to Side Hustle Hero, the show that is laser focused to inspire you to take action to start or to scale your side hustle income streams. I'm your host, Joan Posivy, author of The Way Success Works, How to Decide, Believe, and Begin to Live Your Best Life. Oftentimes we choose a side hustle because we're striving for an additional source of income, or we know that our current full-time work is just not what we want to do for the long term. But in the case of today's guest, I truly believe that what began for him as a side hustle is actually what he is meant to do. I'm convinced that in some form or another, it is and will continue to be his life's work. Len Pierre is Coast Salish. His ancestral name is Pilikvulak. He is an educator, consultant, TEDx speaker, social activist, and traditional knowledge keeper. One of my side hustles is being the sole community member of a local university's research ethics board. That's how I came to know Len. Twice in the past year, he's been a featured speaker at events I've attended, and I've been very impressed. He nurtured his side hustle for a year and a half and then quit his secure government pension full-time job in order to grow his business. Now leading a team of 15 people, he scrambles to keep up with demand. He's got a lot of knowledge to share about what it takes to create a successful side hustle and when and if to make it your full-time work. Be sure to catch the wrap-up at the end of the show, where I drill down on two key takeaways from what Len shares. One will inspire you to reach out for advice, and the other will cause you to see the distortion behind the feeling that you get when you think you can't do something that you really want to achieve. I'm so grateful to be able to share with you today my conversation with Len Pierre. Pilikvulak. Welcome, Len Pierre. I am thrilled that you're joining us today.
Hi, Chika. Thank you so much for having me.
You started Len Pierre Consulting as a side hustle about a year and a half ago. And while I do want to ask about the backstory there, please tell us first, what is the main focus of your work today?
Yeah, absolutely. So our consulting group really is a team of facilitators and consultants who identify as First Nation and Métis professionals. And what we do is we consult for any corporate organization throughout North America who is willing to either learn or transform their organization to be culturally safer for Indigenous folks. So cultural safety is one of our specialities. But we also specialize in conversations and the implementation of reconciliation and decolonization.
And how are you attracting clients? Like, is it an organization that something happens in the workplace and they realize that they need to reach out to you?
Well, what's really interesting about, the work that we do, the climate and context we are in the year 2022, there's a lot of organizations who just know they have this feeling that they need to engage in reconciliation with Indigenous folks. If we look back to September 2021 was the very first National Truth and Reconciliation Day. That was a huge, pivotal moment across the country where organizations were suddenly in this stage of, oh my gosh, we have this whole day that we need to pause and reflect and examine, who we are as professionals as citizens of the country, and as an organization, what is our duty to reconcile with Indigenous peoples across the country? And so that had sparked a huge conversation, a huge dialogue. There was an influx, a tsunami, so to speak, of clients from everywhere from government organizations to small school districts to lawyer firms, consulting firms, universities, were essentially busting down our door, wanting to consult and engage with us. So really, our primary source of receiving people or folks finding us is coming from Google and word of mouth. So often the way we deliver our education training programs and all of our services is with kindness, respect, and humility, because these are not the easiest conversations to have. So we really want to lead by example when we're talking about cultural safety. We want to make sure all of our clients feel safe when they reach out to us and when they are working with us. So that's mainly how people are finding us today.
Wonderful. Oftentimes, someone who has successfully grown their side hustle into full time work has had a history of side hustle attempts, ones that didn't pan out for a whole host of reasons. Is there a history of side hustles like that for you, or was this your first?
No, there was. Before Len Pierre Consulting, I initially wanted to start a coaching business, a wellness coaching business. And so that was my original first side hustle. I started it probably about 4 years ago because I had the humble honor of being a wellness curriculum designer for the First Nations Health Authority. And part of that work was, traveling across the entire province of British Columbia, visiting First Nations communities, talking about health and wellness. And I just really enjoyed that, like that mass influence of being able to stand in front of an audience and then talk about supporting how we all can support one another's wellness. And so I felt really successful in that. People were like, oh, we loved what you said, we loved, would you come back? And so I really love that feeling of being able to support people and teach health and wellness, being Indigenous in the 21st century, so to speak.
Are you one of those people who have always been uncomfortable in front of groups, or was that something that was a learning curve for you as well?
Oh, I swear, since I've been born, I feel like that's my sweet spot. I know it's like one of the most number
Fantastic.
one common fears in society, right? Like, people would rather be giving or be in the coffin than giving the eulogy, so to speak.
Right.
Because, there's this tremendous fear of public speaking. And for me, I've stood in front of a crowd of 1,000 people and delivered a keynote address. People come up to me and they're like, do you ever get nervous when you speak publicly? I'm like, actually, no, I've been trained from a very early age. And this is one of the great things about growing up Indigenous. Our elders in our communities are really good at seeing the gifts and the
Mhm.
talents of the young children who are growing up in their communities. And I was the oldest of a big group of cousins. There's probably 15 of us of
Wow.
cousins that I had, and I was the oldest. And so I was the bossiest and was really doing a lot of the commanding of my little cousins. And my elders were like, hey, this Len has a leadership style. And so my grandmother, who was the matriarch of our community, often did a very numerous public speaking engagements and taught the
Mhm.
masses as well in our sacred longhouses with like 600 people in front of our entire community. And so I think I remember being 7 years old and she was like, okay, come on, grandson. And I would stand beside her as she stood in front of 600 people talking for about an hour. And I would stood there. So I
Wow.
knew from a young age what it feels like to have, a lot of eyes and a lot of minds towards you. And so for me, when I'm public speaking, when I'm, in front of a group of people, it's like breathing. It fills my cup. So I always say that that's my sweet spot.
Yeah. Do you ever feel her there with you in those moments?
Oh, absolutely. I'm gonna get emotional thinking of it, but I totally do. And there are times where when I feel like I say I never get nervous, but I think there's moments before I walk on a stage or in front of a classroom to stand up and speak. There are times where I'm like, I got to say a little prayer to myself, and my prayer is always to those people who have trained. I say, "Come with me, I need you now," and then that's what I feel like. I just embody that and channel that when I'm speaking to people. So yeah, I love that feeling because I never feel like I'm really alone.
Mhm. Come with me and help me be an open channel to hear you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that reciprocity in front of a group, right? And that's what I
Mhm.
love about it is, I always feel like, having a conversation one to one, I could be really socially awkward, but put me in front of like a group of like 600 people and I'm like, I could just channel it and then I could like read the group, read the room, see people smiling or when people are like frowning and their eyebrows kind of come down. I'm like, okay, they're struggling with some of the concepts or ideas that I'm introducing, and so I'll pause to see if there's questions or need for clarity. But I love that reciprocity of engaging with a large group.
And it'd be so rewarding too to be at that point where you have the ability and that comfort level with the audience, with the group, to be able to read that and respond accordingly. It's
Hmm.
not like you're like sticking to the script. You're very much in the moment, which
Hmm.
again came through very much for me when I heard you present. You'd mentioned one of your first side hustles was pursuing to be that coaching. What happened with that?
I think that I got just really busy with life.
Mhm.
Again, side hustles are no small thing. It was a passion of mine, absolutely, but I think that it kind of fell through the cracks, probably because I wasn't as serious in my mind about it just then. I was really trying to excel and climb the corporate ladder in in the organization I was working for, which I think was Kwantlen University at the time. And so I wanted to climb the corporate ladder, and so I was just wholeheartedly poured myself into my career, and so I think that pulled a lot of energy and time away from my side hustle, and so it eventually kind of fell between the cracks, and so yeah, I kind of lost sight of it, and then the pandemic hit, and then I was like, okay, well, there goes going into First Nations communities and coaching and those kinds of things, so it really kind of put a stall in it.
So, how did the birth of the consulting business start?
Yeah, I would say, probably I think there's a relationship between the coaching that I wanted to do and then it probably going dormant and then really just blossoming into this consulting work that I do. And I don't know if I would have been able to do this if the pandemic had not have hit the way it did. So I was working from home before the pandemic. I think just 1 month I negotiated one of my contracts into to being able to work from home, and through that work, I was able to be incredibly effective in my job. And then I had kind of thought about returning back to this coaching idea, and I had just put myself out there on a website saying that I was a coach for Indigenous health and wellness, and it was like one of those free those free website. I didn't even buy a domain or anything. I was like gonna start this slowly on the side of my desk, right?
Okay, okay,
And
I can afford that. That's in my
yeah.
budget.
Yeah, exactly, and it was like, oh my gosh, thinking back to my first website, I'm like, I put no energy into it. I'm like, now that I think about it, it's like so embarrassing, but all those templates and everything.
Mhm.
And so it was out there, and I think it was out there for maybe a month and a half, 2 months into the pandemic, and somebody had found it. Somebody had found my website and seen that I have this specialization. They read my bio, and in my bio, with my background being in education, I can write curriculum, and I don't just write curriculum, I can indigenize curriculum. And this organization called the Canadian Centre for Mental Health and Addiction was like, wow, like we have been looking for an Indigenous curriculum designer for years, and now we found you, and you
Wow.
have an experience in substance use and addiction programming at the community level. And so I was like, oh my gosh. I'm like, yes, I got so excited. They invited me to consult with them on a project and indigenize their mental health and addiction curriculum. And so that was my very first client. And from there, it kind of like, that was one client that had 6 months worth of my time. And I think months after that, there was another client who was like, we want this same kind of thing, but then you'll have to train us in, you'll have to train our team in this too. So I was like, yeah, absolutely. So that's where the consulting kind of came from, is that I made up my mind that I was going to start on the side of my desk. And I think when COVID hit, everybody was searching for online, and then consulting all of a sudden became super accessible because of meeting over Zoom and meeting over Teams. And so I was able to, have a really quick 30-minute meeting at the end of my workday for my 9 to 5 job and stay on top of the projects that I was signing up for with my clients. And yeah, and then one month after another, I just kept on gaining more and more traction with clients who were like, "Hey, come work with us." So yeah.
And to think it started from that lousy website.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned a couple of times the term indigenize. What do you mean by that? Could you give me an example of that, just for clarity?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of our clients wanted to indigenize a curriculum that they have, and so it's a mental health curriculum. So the mental health curriculum is to talk about therapies, acceptance and commitment therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and so one of our clients came forward and is like, "Hey, is this even possible to indigenize?" And so we go into investigation mode and are like, "Okay, if we can see your curriculum, we can examine the content that you have in there and we'll let you know." Then what we have found is that there are many elements of these very popular 21st century best practices of therapies like acceptance commitment therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. These are very popular, very effective therapy tools. But if you peel back the layers of those practices, there's so much ancient indigenous knowledge and practices and ceremonies in a lot of those things. And so what we did is we transformed their curriculum to have indigenous ways of doing and knowing and being. And so we've redesigned it into a indigenous framework. So it's now an indigenized curriculum, meaning that it talks about the teachings of the animals, teachings of elders, the sacred laws of these lands and nations that relate to cognitive behavior therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy. And we talk about how we can mobilize those with our ancient knowledge. And then we equip it with an Indigenous facilitator. So now it is Indigenous run with Indigenous content and now to be delivered in First Nations communities where young Indigenous people will have access to these workshops. That's an example of how we can take, everyday practice things and then we indigenize them. And the whole purpose for indigenization is to reconcile with ourselves, to reclaim our power back, and our rightful place in the society. But it's also, scientifically proven that when
Mhm.
we are reflected in the curriculum, we are a lot more likely to resonate with that what it is that we are learning. If the curriculum reflects who we are and where we're kind of coming from, our worldview, we tend to retain that knowledge a little bit more. So it makes it a lot more effective. So that's an example of indigenize.
Thank you for that. That sounds brilliant, actually.
Mhm, mhm.
And so it was a year and a half that you nurtured that consulting business until you made the decision to quit your 9 to 5. Is that correct?
Yes.
My understanding is that you were working full time for Fraser Health Authority at the time.
Yeah.
And for the benefit of our listeners, that's a government body that's responsible for the delivery of hospital and community based health services to more than like 1.9 million people in the geographic area they serve.
Mhm.
That's a government job, Len. It's
Mm.
got stability, it's got a pension.
Yeah.
What caused you to not only start the side hustle there, but then actually leave Fraser Health? That's a
Yeah.
big step.
It was a big step, and it caused a lot of sleepless nights and anxiety and a whole, turbulent of emotions being like, "What am I doing? Am I really serious? Should I be doing this?" And one of the biggest things I've learned in my side hustle is I really listen to an incredible group of friends and colleagues who I identify as mentors for this work. And I consulted with so many people that freelance and work for themselves, people who are consultants who work for themselves. And I told them my story and I said, "This is my situation." And I'm like, "Should I do this?" And they were like, "Heck yes, you should do this." And then I was like, "Okay, but that wasn't enough. I needed more validation. I needed more support for this." And so I probably checked in with about 6 or 7 folks, just saying, "I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about this," and it wasn't an easy decision. I probably took about 3 months, January, February, March. I thought around Christmas time because I took 2 weeks off around Christmas, and I was like, I'm feeling like it's going to happen. I feel like it's going to happen. I was telling everybody that was close to me, right? I was telling my partner, I was telling my children, I was telling my parents, and I was like, I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen. And then in the new year, it was like my very first day back to work at Fraser Health. I was like, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And I was like, okay, I will do a solid, I'll end it at the end of the fiscal year and I'll do full on Len Pierre consulting in the new year, or not the new year, the new fiscal year. So April 1st was my very first day working for myself.
Wow.
And it wasn't an easy decision, but I think for me, it was part of me was like, okay, I'm going to do it. And if I fall flat on my face, if I fail, it's not really a failure because I will have learned so much from that. But I have built over the years enough of a security blanket and enough of a foundation where I'm like, I can afford to do this for a year as an experiment and have so much fun with it. And so I think that that was one of the biggest things that I wanted to do was not I enjoy this work. I enjoyed my Fraser Health 9 to 5 job. It was very secure and lots of benefits and those kinds of things. And I had a really great reputation in Fraser Health. And they kept on wanting to promote me, and I was like, actually, I don't know how long I'll be here. So, but yeah, for me, it was I'm safe, I am secure, and I want to have fun. And I'm going to dive into this. I'm going to invest in this. So, yeah.
And you probably would have regretted it if you didn't give it a shot.
Oh, totally. I kept thinking about that too. I was like, if I don't, I'm going to wish that I had. If I don't, I'm going to wish that I had had. And now when I wake up, I'm like, I love it because no 2 days are the same. I have a wonderful group of clients who I call my priority one. That means that they have like a set schedule with me that really, make me feel so incredibly valuable in our working relationship. And so that excites me. I work with different people and a different group of folks every single day. And so I wake up every morning and I'm really excited for what the week has and what the day has ahead of me. And I'm like, yeah, but I always think back to, you don't want to regret this. So.
Yeah, I've always said that I would rather try something and have it not work out than play that what if game.
Oh my
What would have
gosh.
happened if I had left Fraser Health and started my own consultancy, et cetera?
Yeah.
So you were thinking about it and even talking about it for quite a little while before you actually made that step. Do you recall the moment when you actually made the decision? Okay, this is it. I'm going to hand in my notice. I'm going to go for this.
I think it was, I was talking about it, talking about it. So Christmas time, I was thinking about it. January, I was like, yeah, I think it's really going to happen. And then it was 1 month before, so it was like just before March. It might have been around March 1st. And I was like, okay, I think I sat down with my boss and there was a lot of shifting and growing that was happening at the time. And they were looking to elevate my position. And so I felt like that was a sign. It was like there was all of this shifting, and it was almost like this fork in the road because there was like if I was elevated to a more senior level position, I was like, oh my gosh, I am going to be here for a long time because I don't take that lightly. If you put me into a brand new senior position, that's like a 4 to 5 year commitment just to make sure that your department that you are leading is a-okay. It's aligned with your professional reputation and is successful. And everybody feels successful in that. So I'm like, that's a 5 year commitment. So I felt like it was like the universe was like, I'm gonna put this fork in the road because you've been you've been sitting on the fence for too long. And then so I was like, and then my consulting company was just in such a good space. And I had all of these clients who were on a wait list. And I was like, the work is there. And
Wow.
there's such interesting, cool projects that I feel like it was almost like it was a lot of constructing and creating and building things that aren't there right now for like 5 other organizations. And I'm like, okay, my heart, right? And I always think it's so important to listen to your heart, listen to that gut instinct. And my gut was like, I think this is the direction we're going. And so I sat with my boss and I was like, I'm gonna give you my notice. I'll give it in 2 weeks so that you have it, but I want you to know now because of with all the shifting that's happening, you can prepare accordingly. So he was not happy and really sad. But and then that was when the anxiety really started for me, right up until day one, April 1st. And then it was like this freedom and this fun and this excitement, this adventure that I felt on April 1st when it was my first day working 9 to 5 for me.
How did you feel physically that day?
Oh, it was like it's just this, I don't know. It's like it's so liberating. It's liberating in the sense that you feel like you have more room and more space for really you get to call the shots. You get to do whatever you want. You get to be creative. You get to make all the decisions. And so it was really liberating. That's the best way I can describe it. Is just I felt like there was no pressure. I mean, there was a lot of pressure, but I mean, like, it was aligned with the things that I wanted to do. So there's a lot of autonomy within that freedom, and so that's what I felt. I felt lighter, right? I don't know if
Mhm.
that
Like
that
this,
makes sense.
yes, like this load had been lifted too, because
Oh,
you finally made the decision.
yes, totally,
So that
totally.
burden had been lifted as well.
Yeah, for sure.
It's hilarious, Len. Our experiences are like completely parallel in this regard. I was a young branch manager in a financial institution. And I remember setting a goal that once I reached branch manager, I was thinking, oh, my life would be made. But then I worked at it for a couple of years and I thought, this isn't it. This isn't where I
Hmm.
want to be. And I had started planning my escape route. And there was one person within the organization, he was at the boardroom level, that they were talking about that promotion for me. I was
Hmm.
going to be leaving the branch and basically running the lending portfolio for the entire company. And I had
Mm.
confided in him what my plans were. And he comes back to me and he's like, Joan, you need to tell them. Like they're making these plans and I'm sitting there not knowing what to do. So very similar to what you went through. And there
Hmm.
was this fork and it's like if I jump into this and I commit to it, yes, it's going to be another 5 years. And like you, my heart was just not there.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
here we are now talking to one another. Like,
yeah.
what have
Right.
never happened if
I
we
know,
didn't
right?
follow our heart?
Yeah. And it was so conflicting at the time too. Like, I don't know if you felt that when you were going through when you got to that fork, right? Because it was like you spend years, like if not more than a decade, just trying to just to get to that spot of like to that promotion. Like this is what everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of the people in the
Yes.
workforce want to get to that level. And I like worked my butt off to get to that place where somebody would be like, okay, we want to elevate you, right? We want to promote you, and then it comes, and it's like this really. It was so you had to do this a lot of internal work, right? This internal reflection and being, and yeah, it really does ultimately come down to that happiness and what your heart wants, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
and in spite of what in my case too, I had a number of people telling me, "You're crazy to leave. You've got it made if you stay with the bank." And I'm like, "Yeah, but no, there's
Yeah,
gotta
yeah.
be another way." I
Yeah.
mean, I am so thankful for that experience that I had because then as I went into businesses and as an entrepreneur, I had a solid understanding of what the lenders were looking for in terms of business loans and commercial mortgages and all that sort of stuff. So it was fantastic, win-win.
Yeah.
What do you think has been one of the most effective things that you've done or still doing to grow your business?
I would say the most effective thing that I am doing to grow my business is to keep up with the demand. So when I started a year and
Wow.
a half ago, oh my gosh, it was was taking on more and more clients, and then I was generating a huge wait list because I just simply could not keep up with the demand for people who needed training sessions, workshops, and that project consultation pieces. So September, actually, I think it was like no, that's 10 months. 10 months into my first year of operation, I had to hire my first my first employee. So I hired a client services manager to help with a huge influx of client inquiries that were kind of coming in, and then to start scheduling somebody to manage my calendar because it was just too much to be able to try and coordinate all of these bookings and workshops, and then to deliver those
Mhm.
trainings and workshops. And so that was my first hire. And then in the new year of 2022, I still couldn't keep up with the demand. So I brought on associate consultants as contractors who I would train in my curriculum and my philosophy and principle and ethics on how to deliver and hold these spaces. So I hired four associate consultants who are incredibly gifted and talented Indigenous facilitators, educators, and consultants, and they joined me, and they're going full force with
Full
this
on.
work, and we still couldn't keep up with the demand. And so I've onboarded elders and cultural knowledge keepers and additional consultants as of a month ago, and so now we are a team of 15 people, and so we're finally
Wow.
starting to kind of like find this rhythm where we're keeping up with the clients that are kind of coming in.
You must be shaking your head from when you go back to when you were deciding whether to do this or not. Is it really feasible? Is it going to work? And now you've got this amazing team.
Yes, totally.
There's only so many seminars, presentations, sessions that Len can physically do in a day. Have you ever thought about creating like an online course? Is that possible for the content that you share?
Yes, it's so funny that you mentioned that because actually moving into the summer months, because since I have launched my consulting business, I have been working around the clock. And a part of
Mm,
that is working my 9 to 5 job throughout those years that year too, and then doing my consulting work during the evenings. That's very, very long days. And so I've booked off July and August to work on my own consulting resources and curriculum and all of the products that we want to offer our clients. And one of the biggest things that I've had on my mind as a project for our consulting company is our own online courses. So I have the curriculum; it's ready to go. I have the template and the host the courses. So that will be a project that I will be implementing throughout the summer months. Is my own online course.
excellent. I look forward to seeing it.
Yeah.
What's the best way for our listeners to connect with you?
I'm available through social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. I often encourage folks to follow me on social media because I promote my own resources, my own educational resources that I produce myself, whether they're videos or fact sheets or cultural safety memos. I'm myself also this summer wanting to work on my own podcast and have conversations just like this as well. And also feel free to check out my website if you would ever like to get in contact with us and see if the many services that we offer for teams and organizations. That would be lenpierreconsulting.com.
Perfect. And we'll make sure that is in our show notes so
Okay.
people can find you very quickly. Len, you're clearly someone who has gone beyond their fears, bit of self doubt in there, left a fantastic 9 to 5, well paying, stable job. So you know about taking risks. What's one tip or your best piece of advice to help someone to start or scale their side hustle dream?
I would say number one, always listen to your gut. Listen to your gut, listen to your heart. Don't be so worried about time. Let the side hustle grow on the side of your desk for as long as you could possibly do it for until you come to your own fork in the road because I think that's where it kind of starts to take care of itself. It just becomes more organic, more grassroots when you get to that pivotal point because I know I had those, I had that a year ago, I had that 2 years ago. I'm like, I would love to do this. But, I think that question of time quite lingers for many of us who are working on that side hustle. When will it no longer
Mhm.
be my side hustle? And I would say you just hold on to it for as long as you possibly can and until, you get to that point where it just makes too much sense that you know which side of the fork of the road that you got to do. And then I would say definitely number 2, have fun with it. Tip number 3, I would say is, surround yourself with like-minded, like-hearted folks. I have a lot of people I check in with about and consult with for my business. They're friends, they're relatives, they're people who I've just met in meetings and I'm like, "Hey, I have my own consulting business. Can I have like 5 minutes worth of your time? Can I take you out for coffee? I have some questions I would love to ask you." And I've never, nobody's ever said no to me. So I would say look to build a network too of like-minded, like-hearted folks who are doing the work that you are kind of doing, what your side hustle is, and start to learn from them.
That is so important, Len, to have those people around that you can reach out to that are like-minded and who want to see you succeed.
Yes, absolutely.
Hajka Palikwilek.
Yes.
Thank you so very much, Len, for sharing your knowledge, your words of wisdom, your compassion, your understanding, and for being today's side hustle hero.
Hi, Chika. Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun. Thank you.
Before you go, here are 2 key takeaways for you to consider. Len mentioned the importance of building a network of mentors, people you can turn to for advice and to bounce ideas off of. The way it starts is for you to ask, "Hey, can I buy you a coffee? Can I meet with you for 20 minutes?" Now, there's no guarantee that they're going to say yes, but you know what? The vast majority of them are going to say yes, and that's great. And in the very rare instance you do encounter a no, just say to yourself this 4-letter word: next, next, and move on to the next potential mentor. And realize that there could be so many reasons why the person said no. Maybe they're going through something at the moment, or at the present time, they're swamped. You could always loop back and ask again in the future. The second takeaway, and for me, the realization of this truth when I learned it many, many years ago, was literally life changing. And that is When you and I were born, the faculties of our conscious mind were not yet fully developed, so we were an open channel to the influences around us. Now, the scope of a podcast, doesn't allow me to take a deep dive into this, but suffice it to say that what you sometimes think of as something you can't do, like public speaking, for instance, is not the truth. It's just a belief you have. And beliefs can be so powerful, but it's not the truth. It's just a reflection of how we were raised in those early years. Len's grandmother was giving him an incredible gift by bringing him up on stage with her or at the front of the longhouse when she spoke in front of hundreds and hundreds of people. I feel that she knew exactly what she was doing. She was speaking with confidence and authority. And so those are the feelings, the beliefs that were being planted into Len's mind to associate large groups of people and positive feelings. My experience as a youngster with large groups was the polar opposite. I was born with introverted tendencies and was raised by a very loving but stay in the background, not speak up kind of mom. And so, as a young child, when we were in a large group of strangers, the feeling emitting from her was not one of confidence and control, but rather the feeling was of dread and fear. So, the messaging I received about being in large groups was quite different than Len's. Now, I should point out, I am in no way trying to play the blame game here. A person cannot give you something they don't have. My mom could not transmit to me the feeling of being comfortable in front of groups of people if she didn't feel that way herself. Makes sense, right? But if it's something that I wanted to change and I wanted to and did, then it's up to me to make it happen. The key takeaway is the knowledge that we can alter aspects of our old conditioning if it's not giving us the results that we want. Because understand, it's our conditioning that's controlling our behavior, and our behavior is what's giving us our current results, our happiness, our health, and our wealth. Know this, when you get the feeling that you can't do something that you truly want to do, it's not a reflection of your potential, but it is a reflection of your conditioning. And if it's something that you want to do badly enough, you can absolutely change, alter that conditioning, as have I. Well, that's a wrap for today. You'll find the links we mentioned and the show notes on our website, sidehustleheropodcast.com. And I'd love to hear your feedback on the show, on the guests, how this podcast is helping you. What areas could we do better? Shoot me an email message to hello@joanposivy.com or by DM on Instagram @JoanPosivy. Thanks for listening and hustle on.